The road from Sepphoris to Nazareth carried a smell that no child should learn so early. It reached them before the crosses came into view. Thick, metallic, sweet in a way that made the stomach turn. Flies gathered in black clouds along the roadside, rising and settling again, as if the air itself was breathing. A woman tightened her grip around the small boy at her side and quickened her pace. She pulled his face into her shoulder, but she could not cover his nose. She could not silence the sounds. Low groaning, not loud, not desperate, just enough to remind anyone passing that the men on those crosses were not yet dead. Wood creaked under shifting weight, ropes strained, iron held. The boy turned his head anyway. Rows of bodies lined the road. Some slumped forward, some strained upward, fighting for a breath that would not come. Skin torn, faces swollen beyond recognition. This was not execution. This was a message. Rome did not just kill, Rome displayed. The city of Sepphoris had rebelled, and Rome had answered the way empires always answer: fire, steel, and crosses. Hundreds of them, enough to turn a road into a warning that stretched for miles. The woman whispered a prayer under her breath, in a language older than the empire itself. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop walking. The boy did not understand the politics. He did not know the names of governors or kings. He only knew what he saw, what he smelled, what he would never forget. His name was Yeshua. It was a common name, ordinary, unremarkable, and no one on that road, not the soldiers, not the dying, not even his mother, could have known what history would one day demand of that child, because the empire that lined those roads with crosses was not finished. And one day, years from that moment, under another sky, on another hill just outside another city, that boy would hang on one of his own. The crosses did not appear by accident. They were not the result of random cruelty or isolated punishment. They were policy, calculated, systematic, designed to be seen. A few years before that boy walked that road, the region had burned. When Herod the Great died, he left behind more than a kingdom. He left behind instability, power fractured, control weakened. And in that brief moment, rebellion found its voice. Sepphoris rose. It was the crown of Galilee, a city visible from the hills near Nazareth, gleaming in the sunlight, filled with trade, culture, and ambition. But ambition under Rome always came with a cost. The uprising did not last long. Rome answered swiftly. Legions marched in. The city was set on fire. Buildings collapsed into ash. Families scattered or disappeared. And those who resisted were not simply killed. They were made into warnings. Crucifixion was not just execution. It was theater. A slow, deliberate display of power, meant to reach far beyond the victim. The body remained alive long enough to be seen, long enough to be heard, long enough to be remembered. Hundreds were nailed along the roads leading out of the ruined city, not hidden, not buried, elevated. Every traveler would pass them. Every child would see them. Every village would understand. This is what happens when you challenge Rome. Galilee became quieter after that. Not peaceful, just quieter. Conversations lowered. Eyes watched the roads. Taxes were paid on time. Resistance did not disappear. It went underground, into whispers, into hidden places carved beneath homes and hills. And above those hidden tensions, life continued. Children grew, families worked, prayers were spoken in synagogues each Sabbath. The rhythms of ordinary existence carried on beneath the shadow of an empire that did not tolerate defiance. The boy from that road grew up in that world, a world where power was visible in wood and iron, a world where silence could mean survival, a world where everyone knew exactly what the cross was for. And long before he would ever carry one, he had already seen what it did. His name was Yeshua. It was not unusual. In first century Judea, the name was common enough that you could call it across a crowded street, and more than one person might turn. It meant the Lord saves, but in daily life, it sounded ordinary, familiar, almost forgettable. There was nothing in the name itself that marked him for what would come. He grew up in Nazareth, a small hillside village that most people in the wider world had never heard of. It did not appear in the major records of the time. It was not a center of power or influence. It was a place people passed by without noticing. Stone homes pressed into the slope, narrow paths winding between them, dust settling into every surface by midday. The rhythm of life was simple: work, food, prayer, sleep, repeat. From the ridge above the village, you could see the ruins of Sepphoris. Even years after the fires had died, the memory of what happened there never fully left the landscape. Rebuilding had begun, but the scars remained. Blackened stone, broken lines in the architecture, a reminder that Rome could destroy and rebuild at will. The boy would have seen it often. He would have known, even without being told, that the world he lived in was controlled by forces far beyond his village. Armies moved, kings ruled, taxes were demanded, and somewhere beyond the hills, decisions were made that could change everything overnight. And yet, in that small place, he lived quietly. No records of miracles, no crowds, no public declarations. Just a child growing into a young man in a world already shaped by violence, power, and expectation. But beneath that ordinary life, something else was already moving. Ancient texts had spoken long before he was born. Words written centuries earlier, preserved, studied, debated in synagogues across the land. Promises of a coming figure, a deliverer, a king, a suffering servant. Most who heard those prophecies imagined strength in the form they understood. Military victory, political overthrow. A leader who would break Rome the way Rome had broken others. No one standing in Nazareth would have looked at that young man and seen the fulfillment of those words. No armor, no army, no visible claim to power. And yet the trajectory had already been set. The same empire that had filled his childhood with the sight of crosses would one day intersect with his life in a way no one expected. Not as a rebel, not as a king in the way they imagined, but as something far more difficult to recognize and far more impossible to ignore. The story most people think they know begins in the wrong year, in the wrong season, and in the wrong place. The calendar itself gives the first illusion. The designation, Anno Domini, the year of the Lord, suggests a precise starting point, year 1, a clean division between before and after. But history is rarely that neat. Herod the Great, the ruler who ordered the killing of infant boys in Bethlehem, died in the year 4 before Christ. His death is one of the most firmly established dates in ancient chronology, confirmed by multiple historical sources, which means the birth of Jesus had to occur before that moment. Not in year 1, earlier, somewhere between the years 7 and 5 before Christ, in a narrow window defined not by tradition, but by the movement of kings, the records of historians, and the weight of political events unfolding in real time. The season is no less misunderstood. December 25th has become fixed in the modern imagination, wrapped in imagery of snow, stillness, and winter night. But the gospel account describes shepherds living out in the fields, keeping watch over their flocks during the night hours. In Judea, winter is cold and wet. Flocks were not kept in open fields during that season. They were brought in, sheltered, protected from the elements. Shepherds in the fields at night suggests a different time of year. Warmer, dry, likely in the early autumn, when flocks could remain outside and the land still held the heat of long days. Even the setting itself has been softened over time. Not a wooden stable behind a crowded inn, not the scene carved into nativity displays. The reality is far more grounded and far more unsettling. The birth did not take place in comfort. It did not take place in privacy. It did not take place in the kind of space anyone would choose. And almost everything about the version most people remember has been shaped more by tradition than by the world in which it actually happened. To understand what came next, that world has to be seen clearly. Because when the moment finally arrives, it will not look the way anyone expects. The hillside outside Bethlehem was cut with caves. Not deep caverns, but shallow chambers carved into soft limestone, shaped by hand over generations. They were used for shelter, for storage, for animals. Practical spaces, worn smooth by use, carrying the scent of earth, hay, and breath. Inside one of those caves, the air was damp and still. Water fell in slow intervals from the ceiling, each drop landing against packed soil with a quiet, steady rhythm. The smell of animals lingered in the enclosed space. Wool, manure, dust. The kind of place no one chose unless there was no other option. A young woman knelt there. She was likely no more than 16, far from home, far from anything familiar. The journey had already taken its toll, and now the moment had come without comfort, without assistance, without the conditions anyone would call safe. There was no wooden structure, no crafted manger waiting in a clean corner, only stone, rough walls, a feeding trough carved into rock. The pain came in waves. There were no witnesses to record the details, no attendants to steady her breathing, only the sound of her own body laboring and the quiet presence of a man who could do little more than remain beside her. Outside, Bethlehem continued as it always had, small, unremarkable. A town whose name in Hebrew meant house of bread, known more for its history than its importance. Inside the cave, time narrowed, and then the child entered the world the way every human being does, helpless, vulnerable, covered in blood and dust. No announcement marked the moment in that space, no visible sign of power, no indication that anything beyond the ordinary had occurred. And yet the ancient words had already pointed to this place. A ruler from Bethlehem, a child born not in strength, but in weakness, laid not in a cradle, but in a feeding trough cut into stone. The setting did not match expectation. It never does, because what was happening in that cave was not designed to impress the world. It was designed to enter it quietly. The silence did not last long. In a place as small as Bethlehem, news traveled quickly. Footsteps on stone roads carried more than sound. They carried intent. Orders given far away had a way of arriving suddenly, without warning, at the doors of people who had no power to resist them. Herod did not tolerate threats. He did not wait for certainty. Reports had reached him of a child, a king, they said, not crowned, not declared, but spoken of in ways that unsettled him. And in a world where power was secured by elimination, uncertainty was enough. The command was simple: every male child under a certain age, no exceptions. In a village of only a few hundred people, every family knew every child, every name, every face. Every mother knew exactly how many doors the soldiers would have to knock on. The sound of boots approaching would have been enough. There is no detailed record of what those moments looked like. There rarely is. History does not linger long on the cries of the powerless, but the outcome is clear enough. Children taken, families broken, silence left behind where life had been. Somewhere in the night, before those footsteps reached the wrong door, a different kind of warning came. A dream, a message clear enough to act on, urgent enough to obey without hesitation. Joseph woke Mary, gathered what little they could carry, and left. No time to prepare, no time to explain, only movement. They crossed borders not as travelers, but as refugees, leaving behind familiarity for uncertainty, leaving behind language, community, and everything stable for the sake of a child who could not yet understand why they were running. Egypt became their shelter, a foreign land, different customs, different rhythms, a place to disappear, at least for a while, beneath the noise of a larger world. The boy grew there, away from the immediate reach of Herod's command, protected, but not untouched by what had already happened around him. When Herod died, the threat shifted, not gone, just changed. And so they returned, not to Bethlehem, not to the place where everything had begun, but north, to Nazareth, back to the hills, back to a village small enough to be overlooked, quiet enough to be safe. At least, as safe as anything could be under Rome. The child who had been born in obscurity had already crossed borders, escaped death, and entered the world marked not by comfort, but by movement, danger, and survival. Before he could choose a path, one had already been set beneath his feet. By mid-morning, the dust had already settled into his hands. Fine particles of limestone pressed into the lines of his skin, clinging to sweat, filling the small cuts that never fully healed. The work did not wait for comfort. It began early, under a rising sun that hardened shadows and sharpened edges. Stone does not yield easily. It has to be struck, measured, shaped with intention. A misplaced blow could split a block the wrong way. A weak edge could collapse under weight. Precision mattered. Strength mattered. Endurance mattered. This was the world he lived in. The word later used to describe his trade would be translated as carpenter. But in that region, wood was scarce. Stone was everywhere. Builders worked with what the land provided. He was not shaping furniture. He was cutting rock. The quarries between Nazareth and Sepphoris were active again. Reconstruction had begun after the destruction. Herod Antipas was rebuilding the city into something larger, stronger, more aligned with Roman design. Theaters, public buildings, structured streets. Every skilled worker within walking distance was needed, and so he walked, from Nazareth to the work sites, day after day, carrying tools, lifting stone, learning the angles, the balance, the weight of materials that would outlast the men who placed them. His shoulders changed, his hands hardened, his posture adjusted to the rhythm of labor. This was not the image most people imagine. Not fragile, not detached, not removed from the physical demands of the world. He spoke Aramaic at home, the language of daily life, Hebrew in the synagogue, reciting ancient texts preserved across generations, and Greek in the presence of foremen and administrators tied to the expanding influence of Rome. 3 languages, not as a sign of status, but as a requirement of survival in a region shaped by overlapping cultures and authority. Years passed this way. No public ministry, no recorded miracles, no crowds gathering to listen. Just work, repetition, growth that no one documented. And yet, everything he would later say carried the imprint of these years. Foundations, cornerstones, structures that stand or fall based on what they are built upon. He did not borrow those images. He lived them. Long before anyone followed him, long before anyone wrote about him, he was shaping stone in silence. And the silence was not empty. It was preparation. Above ground, Nazareth appeared quiet. Small homes built from local stone, narrow paths winding between them, the sound of daily life moving at a steady, predictable pace. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it drew attention. That was part of its protection. But beneath the surface, the village told a different story. The bedrock in that region was soft enough to carve. Over time, chambers had been cut into the earth below homes and courtyards. Not decorative spaces, not storage alone. These were places designed with purpose. Hidden entrances, narrow passageways connecting one chamber to another. Low ceilings forcing those inside to crouch and move carefully. Ventilation shafts disguised above ground, allowing air to circulate without revealing what lay beneath. Entire families could disappear into these spaces within moments. And that was exactly the point. Roman patrols did not always announce themselves. Tax collectors did not always arrive with warning. Soldiers moved through regions like Galilee with authority that did not require permission. When they came, there was rarely time to negotiate. You either stood and faced them, or you vanished. These underground systems allowed a village to do something Rome did not expect, to become empty without leaving. The people of Nazareth were not passive. They adapted. They prepared. They lived above a network designed for survival, in a world where power could arrive at any door. And he grew up there, walking above chambers carved in secrecy, eating meals in homes built over hiding places, sleeping in a village that knew exactly how fragile its safety really was. This was not the peaceful isolation often imagined. This was quiet resistance, not open rebellion, not armed uprising, but a constant awareness that control from above did not eliminate the will to endure below. He would have known where the entrances were. He would have understood why they existed. And long before he ever spoke publicly about kingdoms, authority, or power, he had already lived in a place that understood the difference between what is seen and what is hidden. The river moved slowly that afternoon. The Jordan was not clear. It carried silt, turning the water a muted brown beneath the weight of the current. Heat lingered in the air, pressing down on the gathered crowd. People stood along the banks, some waiting, some watching, some already stepping forward. At the center of it all stood a man whose voice had carried across the region. John. His clothing was rough, camel hair against sunburned skin. His words were sharper than anything most had heard in years. He did not speak like the teachers in the synagogues. He did not soften his message. Repent, prepare, something is coming. And people came, farmers, soldiers, tax collectors, men and women who had no reason to stand in the same place, drawn by something they could not fully explain. One by one, they stepped into the water and were lowered beneath the surface, a public act of cleansing, of turning, of acknowledgement that something in their lives needed to change. Then he saw him, the one who had grown up in the hills, the one who had lived quietly, worked quietly, and had never once stood in front of a crowd like this. John paused. The noise along the river seemed to fade, not because it stopped, but because his attention fixed on a single figure stepping toward the water. There was recognition there, not loud, not dramatic, but certain. "I need to be baptized by you," John said, his voice lower now, no longer carrying across the crowd. The response was simple, a step forward. No argument, no explanation, just presence. And so John lowered him into the river. For a moment, everything was still. Then he rose. Water fell from his shoulders, returning to the current, and something shifted. The sky did not change in the way storms announce themselves. There was no gradual build, no warning. One moment, the world was as it had always been, and then it was not. A voice, not imagined, not internal, not symbolic. Clear. "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Those close enough to hear did not move. The air held the words as if they had weight, and just as quickly as it began, the moment passed. But the direction of everything had changed. The years of silence were over, and almost immediately he left the river and walked into a place where no crowd could follow. The wilderness did not welcome anyone. Jagged stone, open sky, no shelter from heat during the day, no protection from cold at night. The land stripped everything down to what could survive without comfort. He stayed there, days without food, strength leaving the body slowly at first, then more rapidly, muscles weakening, focus narrowing, the mind beginning to strain under the absence of what it needed to function. And that is when the voice came again. Not from above, from close. "If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread." The suggestion was precise, not abstract, not philosophical, immediate, practical. Solve the hunger. Use what you have been given. He did not. The answer came from words already written long before he stood in that place. Man does not live on bread alone. The temptations did not stop there. Power was offered, authority over kingdoms, recognition without suffering, each one built on a single idea. Take the path that avoids the cost. Each one answered the same way, not with display, not with force, with refusal. By the time he left the wilderness, nothing visible had changed. No followers, no public declaration, no sign to the world that anything had happened. But the direction was now irreversible. What had been prepared in silence had begun. He did not begin with a crowd. He began with people. Not the kind anyone would assemble if the goal was stability. Not the kind chosen for harmony, agreement, or shared background. There was no attempt to build a group that made sense on the surface. He walked along the shoreline and called men who were working. Fishermen, hands rough from nets and rope, lives structured around tides and seasons. They were not looking for a teacher. They were not waiting for a new direction. "Follow me." 2 words, no explanation, and they left. Not gradually, not after negotiation. Nets dropped, boats left behind. A decision made in a moment that would unravel everything they had known. He approached a tax booth next. A man sitting at it would have been avoided by most. Tax collectors did not just gather money. They represented Rome. They enforced it. They benefited from it. Their own people saw them as collaborators, as men who had chosen profit over loyalty. "Follow me." The man stood up. Coins still on the table, position abandoned, identity rewritten in a single step. Then there was another. Simon, not just politically aware, not just frustrated with Roman control. He belonged to a movement that believed in direct action, violent action, if necessary. The kind of man who saw collaborators as legitimate targets. And now he stood in the same circle as a tax collector. Across from him, within reach, there were no speeches given to smooth that tension. No attempt to erase their pasts. No demand that they pretend those differences did not exist. They remained, real, present, dangerous. Others joined. Men with strong tempers. Men who reacted quickly, spoke loudly, acted before thinking. Men who had spent their lives in one place, now stepping into something they could not fully understand. And one more, Judas, not from Galilee, from Judea, an outsider among them, even within the group itself. 12 in total, a collection that should not have worked. Different loyalties, different histories, different instincts, and yet they stayed, not because they agreed with each other, but because they had all heard the same voice. He did not ask them to resolve their differences first. He gave them something that made those differences secondary. A kingdom, not of Rome, not of rebellion, not of political structure, something else entirely. And in that space, a traitor and a zealot shared the same fire. Not because tension disappeared, but because something greater had entered it. The smell reached you before you saw it. Stagnant water, infection, bodies that had not healed in years. The air beneath the covered colonnades was thick, heavy with the kind of waiting that turns hope into routine. The pool was called Bethesda, House of Mercy. 5 porticos surrounded it, creating shaded spaces where people gathered not for comfort, but for proximity. They lay on the stone, sat against pillars, watched the surface of the water as if it held an answer. Blind, lame, paralyzed. Hundreds of them. Some had been there so long that no one remembered when they first arrived. Time blurred in that place. Days passed, seasons turned, but the expectation remained the same. When the water moves, be first. That was the belief. Something beneath the surface would stir the pool. and whoever entered it first would be healed. No guarantees, no fairness, only speed, only chance. What most did not know was what lay beneath the structure itself. The site had been shaped by influence that did not come from their own tradition. It resembled a Greco-Roman healing complex, a place tied to rituals, symbols, and ideas imported from a world that promised restoration through systems, through practices, through repetition. People came because they had nothing else. And among them was a man who had been unable to walk for 38 years. 38 years of watching others move. 38 years of depending on others to carry him, position him, leave him there again. By the time anyone noticed him now, he had already outlived most expectations placed on a life like his. He did not push forward when the water stirred. He could not. There was always someone faster, always someone closer, always someone else stepping in before him. When Jesus entered that place, he did not go to the center. He did not wait for the water. He walked directly to the man. No ritual, no preparation, no movement toward the pool. A question, do you want to be healed? The man answered the only way he knew how, by explaining the system. I have no one to help me into the water. That was the framework he understood. Access, timing, competition, and Jesus bypassed all of it. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. No gesture toward the pool, no acknowledgement of the ritual, just a command. And something happened that had not happened in 38 years. Muscles responded, weight shifted, feet touched stone. The system was still there. The water still waited. The crowd still watched. But none of it had been required. What they had built around hope had just been undone by a voice. The hillside filled before the sun had fully risen. People arrived in waves. Some had walked through the night. Others came from nearby villages, drawn by reports that did not quite make sense, but were too consistent to ignore. He stood above them, no formal platform, no structure built to elevate him, just ground slightly higher than the rest, enough for his voice to carry. When he began to speak, he did not quote the established teachers. He did not build his authority on those who had come before. He spoke directly. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The words moved across the crowd without explanation. Blessed are those who mourn. No condition, no caliphers. Blessed are the meek. In a world where strength determined survival, where honor was gained through visibility, wealth, and dominance, the statements did not align with anything they had been taught to expect. Each line inverted the system. Each sentence shifted value away from those who held power and placed it into the hands of those who had none. The reaction was not immediate. Confusion does not always show itself right away, but those who understood the structure of their society felt it. Something was being dismantled. And then he went further. He began to speak about himself, not in the language of political leaders, not in the form of a claim that could be easily categorized or dismissed. He called himself the Son of Man. To many, it sounded ordinary, a way of referring to humanity, a humble expression. But for those who knew the ancient texts, the phrase carried weight. It pointed to a vision recorded generations earlier, a figure who approached the presence of God and was given authority that did not end, a kingdom that could not be destroyed. And he used that title for himself. The tension shifted. This was no longer about teaching. This was about identity. Then he removed any remaining distance. Before Abraham was, I am. The statement did not require interpretation. It reached back to the moment when the name of God had been spoken from fire. The response was immediate. Hands moved toward stones. Not out of confusion, out of clarity. They understood exactly what he was saying. The issue was not that he had spoken unclearly. The issue was that he had spoken with a level of authority they could not accept. The space between teacher and threat collapsed in a moment. And from that point forward, the question was no longer whether he would be opposed. It was how far that opposition would go. The garden was quiet. Olive trees twisted upward from the earth, their branches casting long, uneven shadows across the ground. The air carried the faint scent of crushed fruit from the press nearby. Stone lay beneath his hands again, cold and familiar. He had been here before, but not like this. He moved a short distance away from the others, close enough to hear them breathe, far enough to be alone. The weight of what was coming did not arrive suddenly. It had been building, layer by layer, moment by moment, until it could no longer be held at a distance. He fell forward, not in ceremony, not in composed prayer, into the ground. Father, if it is possible, let this pass from me. The words were not distant, not symbolic. They were immediate. real. He had seen what crucifixion did. He had walked past it as a child. He knew the process, the nails, the exhaustion, the slow failure of the body under its own weight. He knew, and still, the answer did not change. Not my will, yours. When the soldiers came, they did not hesitate. Torches cut through the darkness. Metal reflected light in sharp flashes. The group that had followed him scattered in moments. The man who had stood closest denied even knowing him before the night was over. The trial did not follow law. It moved too quickly, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Testimony forced. Judgment decided before questions were finished. By morning, the decision was no longer theirs to carry out. Rome would handle the execution. The scourging came first. Leather whips embedded with fragments of bone and metal tore into flesh with each strike. Skin split. Blood followed. The body weakened before it ever reached the place of execution. Most did not survive this part. He did. They led him through the streets, carrying the beam that would hold his weight. The path was not long, but it did not need to be. By the time they reached the hill, his strength was already gone. Golgotha, the place of the skull. The procedure was efficient. They laid him down, positioned the arms, drove iron through the wrists, not the hands, where the body could not hold. The sound of the hammer carried across the hill. Final, irreversible. The cross was lifted, dropped into place, and the real process began. Breathing became the battle. Each inhale came easily. Each exhale required effort. To release the air, the body had to push upward against the nails, lifting weight through pain that did not lessen, then collapse again, then repeat, over and over. Hours passed this way. Voices surrounded him, some mocking, some watching, some silent. And in the middle of it, he spoke. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. Not anger, not accusation. Forgiveness. The sky changed. Darkness moved in at a time when it should not have been there. The ground shifted. The structure of the temple itself tore from top to bottom, as if something unseen had moved through it with force. And then, with a final breath, he released it. Not taken, given. Silence followed. His body was removed and placed in a tomb cut into rock. A stone rolled across the entrance, a seal placed over it. Guards stationed nearby. Rome secured what it believed was finished. For 3 days, nothing moved. No public statement, no reversal, no visible sign that anything remained. Then, before sunrise, on the first day of the week, the silence broke. The stone was no longer in place. The seal was broken. The guards were gone. Inside, the body was not there. The cloths remained, laid where they had been wrapped, undisturbed, as if what had been inside them had simply passed through. She stood at the entrance, not understanding. Then she heard her name, spoken the way only one person had ever spoken it. She turned, and he was standing there, alive, not as memory, not as vision, physical, present. Others saw him too, spoke with him, touched him, ate with him. Men who had run returned. Men who had hidden stepped forward, not with uncertainty, but with conviction strong enough to carry them to their own deaths. Because they were not defending an idea, they were testifying to what they had seen. The tomb remained. It still does. You can enter it. Stand where the stone once sealed the opening. Look at the place where the body had been laid, and you will find exactly what they found. Nothing. No remains, no relic, no final resting place. Just absence. And that absence has carried a question across 2,000 years. Not forced, not fading, waiting. Who do you say that he is? If this story has changed the way you see him, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Biblical History to continue exploring the world behind these accounts, where history, faith, and reality meet. And in the quiet after everything you have just heard, consider the question that has never gone away. Who do you say that he is?